Okay, well, let's get going. Hi, everyone. My name is Andreas Rydstedt. I hope you can see my screen all right and that my sound is okay. This is a session talking about I was about to say upcoming, but they've already been released, the new changes to the change module in ServiceDesk Plus. So we had this session a week ago, a little bit more, in Swedish. So if you attended that session, this is just going to be pretty much the same content again, so you know. But we decided to do it in English as well, for those people who aren't that up to scratch on their Swedish. So I'm just gonna get going here. If you have any questions, you can write them in the questionnaire function that is in the GUI for the webinar. And we will get to those towards the end, and there will also be some time there to answer those questions, or if you want to have a more direct question afterwards, you can always reach out by email or by on Teams or through our website, just so you know. All right, I'm gonna turn off my camera so we don't have any interruptions. Okay, well, so once again, welcome. My name is Andreas Rydstedt. I work for Inuit AB. And here we are today talking about change management in the ServiceDesk Plus solution. We are going to talk about the ServiceDesk Plus on-premise, both the standard edition and the MSP version. This also does apply to the cloud users because the entire experience around change management is now unified across the platforms. So should be regardless of whatever solution you're using. This should appeal to you. I also work with ITIL from now and again in regards to ITSM, and I work broadly with the ManageEngine suite as a technical specialist. So some of you might have already been in contact with me. But the agenda for today is we're going to talk a little bit just briefly about change management, why it's in the ITSM platform, what is covered under the terms normal, standard, and emergency change, what are the differences going into 14500, and how does change management work overall in ServiceDesk Plus before and after this change is being rolled out. And of course, we're going to demo this for you so you know what it looks like. So I'm going to keep the PowerPoint part of this pretty brief. Okay. And I'm also saying that this is recorded, so you know. So if you know people that want to watch this, we can send this to you afterwards. It will be published on our website, and we will send you an email informing you about that as well. So just so you have been informed that this is being recorded. So just to kick it off, first of all, this is the purpose of change enablement, as it is called these days. It's a very crucial part of the ITSM kind of workspace. So in ServiceDesk Plus, it plays a pretty crucial role. And I know that in these sessions, there are people who are currently working with change management or change enablement. Some have not started yet, but are about to, and some are very experienced. So we're going to talk about this pretty broadly today. And basically, it's adding, changing, or removing anything that is related to a service or a product that you as an organization deliver to your users or your customers. And this is something that has been a key part forever when it comes to IT or technology delivery, that we always have to change. We're constantly changing. It needs to happen, will always happen. And as time is progression in the technical kind of sphere, changes happen more and they happen faster. And they can have a larger and larger impact on our core business, which is the only reason IT exists, to help out the core business of the company we work for. So change management or change enablement has existed for a long time, but it has had some changes over the last few years. So Axelos, or you know, the company running ITIL essentially, and moving through the eras of ITIL 3 and 4, there's been some name changes. There have been some changes to how you approach the idea of change management. They first changed the name a couple of years ago from change management to change control in order to try to kickstart the entire process again. But after some checks in the public, they decided that change control sounded a little bit restrictive. So these days it's called change enablement. But I keep mixing those up constantly. I know more people saying change management than change enablement today, so I'm just going to use those kind of interchangeably throughout this session as well. But the idea is that these days, change management is a lot more fluid than it used to be. Change management had a bad rep last generation because a lot of technical people felt like it was very restrictive and it was preventing people from being productive. Whereas management often felt like it was a very, very useful tool in ensuring quality delivery during the life cycle of a service or a product. So this is kind of moved towards being a lot more focused on IT and technical changes with a lot more automation and agility in that toolbox. So it's also been separated from what is organizational changes. Back in the day, this used to be it used to have everything to do with if you changed something around the organization of a service delivery, that was also kind of covered in the change management process, but these days it's a lot more technically focused. So the tool itself, ServiceDesk Plus, is also moving in that direction to have more pinpoint focus on products and services, which is what we've heard from our customers is what people are looking for. Another big thing that has happened lately in change management is that there is now more talk about the change authority, which we're going to look at how that reflects in the product. Back in the day, there was a lot of focus in our tool and in the process itself that you would have a change manager, and the change manager would dictate the official approval of carrying something out to make sure that if something was going to happen, that individual made that call. The idea of the change authority is that approvals is a lot more fluid, and whoever is the most capable at the time should be able to make the call to move a change forward. So that sort of approval workflow has become a lot more fluid. And there are still companies today that, of course, work with a dedicated change manager and a dedicated, like a CAB, like an approval board. But there's less and less of those about, and the tool has now started more appreciating that. So these are just the highlights of what change enablement as a practice covers. So this is what the tool needs to cover in order for you to be able to work with this productively. So that is planning changes to the environments that are within our organization. It is making sure that there is a public schedule, that everyone knows what's going on. It's about creating models and standardizations so that we don't have to reinvent how we're going to have a quality approval of an upcoming change when we do something. It's also making sure that the workflows, the activities, the reports, the controls that we have are in place, and revisiting them, updating them. Coordination, control, communication, and assessing if we're going in the right direction are key parts of this. So the key to this is staying flexible, agile, and to make sure that we are keeping up with modern IT, essentially. And some of the feedback that we've had in the past was that the change module itself was a little bit restrictive. So that's what we're trying to sort out here. So when thinking about change enablement, I like this image because it shows the idea that a lot of things happens all the time. A lot of things will happen all the time, and a lot of things might feel like they're on an impact course, but all change management and change enablement does is allowing all those things to happen, but making sure they don't collide and making sure that everything happens orderly and in fashion, and that everyone gets to provide feedback and the input that is needed, and that we're working together when making new changes and that they are quality changes. I don't think this is news to many people, but when we're looking at changes, there's usually three things we think about. It's standard changes, normal changes, and emergency changes. The terminology around this can, of course, be very different. Some people use various classifications, but this is the most common sort of example that is easy to display. A standard change is something that is pre-approved, very low cost or negligible cost, very small risk. It's well defined. We've trained our staff into doing it. This is something we do every day. We have a very high success rate or a complete success rate. That's standard changes. Account management, stuff like that, client-based hardware changes, so on. And this is something that more and more people are turning into service requests, because service requests and standard changes share a lot of commonalities. They have the same kind of characteristics of being able to be automated, being very standardized, very low cost, something that we can keep in checklists and quick reports. On the other end of that, we have the emergency, which is something that we very, very quickly have to push something into production. We have to change something. That can be often security related. It can be something that has the potential to have a very large impact on our core business, which, for example, might be a major incident. Something goes wrong in the core data center or a central firewall or something like that. We very quickly have to make a change. We have to make an update. We have to push something. But it's very, very important to never lose control. So even if it is an emergency, we can't just start pulling levers and pushing buttons and trying to sort it out, because there's always that chance that we're making something bad even worse. However, we need to have a completely different way of working with it than if it was a standard or a normal change. And then normal changes is basically everything that falls in between these two. It's not standardized, it's not low risk, it's not low cost, but it is also not something that we need to have a very, very quick, fast lane for. So that's the normal change. And in order to build this in ServiceDesk Plus, we have essentially three parts that we're going to look at as well. It's the templates, and a template will be something that is just like when you're using templates for incidents or for service requests. It's the template that is pre-supplied data, pre-selected choices. So we have server configuration might be one, changes to a certain business system, certain questions we always ask when we're doing firewall updates or whatever it can be. And then the workflow connected to that is how the process looks. So we now filled in the data, we've sent in this request. What happens to it after that? Does it need, when does the approvals kick in? How many stages do we need? How many fields do we need to supply? What are we mandating? And so on. That's the workflow itself. You can have a server configuration following a particular workflow or another, depending on various information. And then, as with a lot of things in the product, there are rules that we can say. So if we have very specific cases, we can create that. If we have, for example, a change related to a specific service, then that might be an exception that we handle in a rule. So if it has to do with this one cloud service, we need to ship an extra email to our provider. We also need to create an additional task. We also need to change the contents of a field. That's something we do with rules. So moving into version 14.500, which was released about 2 weeks ago. There are a couple of things that you need to know if you're currently working with change or if you're moving into it. If you've never seen the current change module, this might not be that interesting to you in this context, but these are some of the changes that are coming up. And the big things we're going to look at is that there is now a separate space for work logs, notes, approvals, related objects. They used to be kind of gathered within their own stage, but now there's a gathered up, a collected space to get a quick overview of all of them. You've also now been given the opportunity to add your own fields and make your own adoptions to the stages themselves. You used to only be able to do that to the submission stage, the first template, but now you can do that throughout the life cycle of the change. There's also 2 new stages. That used to just be submission, planning, implementation, review, and close. There's now two more, which is user acceptance testing and release. So user acceptance testing or user acceptance training, some people seem to be using those interchangeably, UAT, essentially. There's also been an improved function for downtime planning. So you can now do specific downtime planning in the planning stage and have that sync to the release schedule. And that is the planned downtime and the actual downtime that you can actually put in now as well. And this is wrapped up in a new interface that we're looking at. So if you're moving into this update, like I said, whether for the MSP version or the standard version of ServiceDesk Plus, there are a couple of things that you should probably take a look at before you do the update. All of the information that is in your current changes will still be there, but they will be displayed differently. So if you have people working with changes, you have change reviewers, you have change managers, you have change people submitting a lot of changes or helping with implementation, they need to be have received the information that this is going to change, because it will affect how they do their daily work for sure. There are release notes being released. The link is down in the corner. You can also reach that through the website. Go through the release notes and check. It's a pretty long list of things. The changes for 14.500 mainly has to do with changes, releases, and problems, but there are smaller differences here and there. So just, read it through. Use test environments. We always recommend that for any update. If you have the ability to have a test environment, always use that. We can help you set one up if you need our help with it, but it is very much worth taking a look at how it will look with your content before you go live with it. And if you work with problem management a lot, this will be a similar look to your problem management module. So that will also receive a little bit of a graphical overhaul, so you know. Cool. So now we're going to take a look inside what this looks like under the hood. Give me a moment. Cool. Okay. So this is 14.500. When you're looking at the 14.501 even, a lot of things will look quite the same in the sort of overview of the module itself after you update. But once you do update, these changes will apply. They're going to be there immediately. You don't have to do anything more than as soon as you've updated, you log in, this will have gone live. So existing changes will also have this this new kind of look about them. And if we're looking inside a change itself, we can now see that in the older system or the pre-version to 14.500, the changes would have a top bar listing the phases here. I can unfortunately not show it right now because our demo environment went down just before the broadcast. But we have there used to be a global navigation bar here where you could jump through the different stages. That has now been moved here to the left. So a lot of the information has been gathered in a new interface table here, where you can have all of your stages listed, and you can also have your roles, notes, tasks, reminders, and so on logged in one convenient space. So you can quickly get an overview of what you have in the change. So if someone is working as a change reviewer or a change manager, you can now easily go into a change and get a good overview. So the life cycle of change is right here. We can see what stage we're on with the orange light right here. And the green tick means that we have gone through and had an acceptance on each of these phases. We've skipped the approval for this type of change. That's dependent on the workflow. So if we go through the stages here, we have a pretty similar look to what we used to have, and we can put in tasks here. We can put in notes, for example. I can see who made the note. If I go into planning, I have all of this information. It has had a little bit of an update to what it looks like graphically. And these fields are also now, they can take a bit more graphics than they used to. I can't edit them because we've gone through them, but it's a lot of the same features that it used to be. It's just a little bit nimbler now, a little bit faster as well. If you used to have a little bit of stuttering, if you had a lot of changes in your system, that should also be fixed now. This is a lot more efficient on your browser. So we can see that there are notes. We can see that there has been approvals and so on. So once we've moved through one of these changes, this has now been gathered up down here. So we can go in and we can quickly see who had what role in the actual change. We can see who the implementer is. We can see who the UAT owner is. We can see who the change manager for this is, and so on. We can also see all of the notes that were done in any of the stages. We don't have to click through the notes. We can get them all summarized, and we can quickly see from which stage these were written and when they were written and who published them. And we've also had it added now so that you can have an you can call out someone straight into the text fields, and that person can get a notification that they've been called to answer a question or fill in a comment. Excuse me. Same thing goes for tasks. This is all the tasks that have been made in different stages and so on. We can now also see those. And if we're working with, for example, consultants, we're working with vendors, and we're trying to gather up a report for how much to invoice or what the budgeting is looking like. We have all of the work logs that have been submitted throughout the change gathered up, and it takes into how much time has been spent, what costs have been put in, and so on. And we can quickly take a look at those as well. The approval summary has also been moved down here. It's no longer in the last stage of the change. We can now go in and we can see exactly when all the stages were approved and by who. And if the system came over and did it because we've told it that, well, whatever our workflow said was all right, it's now fulfilled that criteria, so the system will just push it through and the system will approve it for us. Of course, we can also have email conversations in and out. That will also be featured here. It's a little bit hard for me to demo. I've been doing a lot of emailing to myself lately, but we can follow conversations that have gone on just like if this was any other ticket. So this creates a much more overviewable space for whatever we're doing here. There are some other changes that have been put in. So you now have a quick way of seeing the workflow that you're working with in the change. So for example, for this change, I can see exactly while I'm working for it, what the workflow is looking like what is actually going on within this change. So if I want to know how this works, what the stages are like, and how it's going to process through, I can take a look. If you've worked with designing these change flows in ServiceDesk Plus, you have a pretty good idea of what we're looking at here. If you haven't, then basically this is where we can design exactly what the life cycle looks like for any change. So we can create as many of these as we want, and then we can publish those. So when we're doing changes, we can see how that moves through. We're going to start in submission. If someone accepts it, it's going to move into another certain stage, and then we might have a condition that checks for, has this to do with the HR system? Yeah, it does. Okay, well then it needs approval from these people and so on. So we can create a really flexible, really dynamic kind of space for very specific or very broad scenarios of change management or change enablement. Another thing that has changed is that there used to be a big button here in the corner, basically saying reject or approve, that we use to move the change forward. That is no longer really there. These days, what you will do instead is that you will just use the status action button up here, so that you have whatever applicable statuses you have will be listed here, or you can also change it by editing this stage up here. This is depending on how you've designed your workflow and what role you have in it, but the big button that was in the corner has been moved. So that's definitely something that you will want to tell your potential users in advance, that if they're logging in on Monday morning about to move a couple of changes ahead and they can't find that button, there's going to be some upset people. So that's worth noting. Taking a look at the new stages, because we can see here that this is looking pretty much the way we remember it looking. However, we have now added the UAT and the release part to it. So if we're looking at the UAT stage right here, there are some pre-packaged new fields here. We have the UAT test plan and we have the UAT issue space. These are rich spaces where we can add, we can browse, we can upload files, documents, if we have like meeting hours or minutes or whatever, we can put that up here. We can also just use a free text field or a rich text field where we can input graphics. We can even put in media here. We can do whatever we want to write down whatever we want for the UAT to happen. And this space here has their own rules. So you can have, for example, if I look here, you can have a UAT owner. So if you have a technical team that is handling this change, but you have someone from another department, or you have someone from one of your user groups that is handling the UAT part, you can have them give an access to this space so that they can actually work with this on their own. And we have the ability to add our own fields. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a second. So, other than that, we have the release stage as well, where we can also add our own fields, add files and so on. And we also have our own descriptive field to begin with. So this is sort of out of the box stuff. And we can also, in both of these, add tasks. We can, add our own scheduling of when these things are happening. And all of these things will be reportable and tokenized for your communication. So definitely worth having. When it comes to the release part, I don't know if anyone of you are using it, but there is a release module in the product as well. We'll just take a very, very brief look at that. So the release module is very similar to how the change module functions. The main difference is that there are a couple of new, we can take a look at an existing one actually. The language used is a bit different because often in an organization, if you have a team working with software development or packaging or deployment, the language they use, the terminology they use, and the organization they have can differ quite a bit from the rest of the IT organization. So here we're talking more about deployment and proper training, code review, and so on. So we might want to have completely different workflows, but also terminology. The questions we want asked and the way we communicate can be very different than just a standard change workflow. So the release module is specialized for them. There's also more focus and associations to tasks and CMDB objects. But if we want to, when we're working with our change, is that we can actually associate release objects. So if we have created a release ticket or a request, we can associate to an existing one to pull information from that release, or we can create a new one from this space. And if we do so, we can decide, okay, do we want to take information from that release record and put that into our change, or do we want the change record to override the release record, or do we want them to stay separate? So we have those values that we can just override if we want to, depending on your process here. So if you've worked with the change part, you're going to be quite familiar with this fairly fast, I think. These stages work very similarly to the other stages. They just have a little bit more of their own terminology, and we've added 2 more steps. But as you know, if you don't want to use those steps, when you design your workflow, you always have the opportunity to just skip them. So we don't need to work with them if we don't want to. When you're designing your own workflow, you can just pass through it. If you haven't seen what that looks like, I can give you a brief check. You just go into the admin panel, and we can take a look. So for example, here I have an emergency change. That just goes to submission, planning, one level of approval, and then it goes straight into implementation and then review. No UAT, nothing like that, just very, very fast through, sort of a fast lane idea of making a emergency change. But then if we have something that covers a little bit more of, it could be anything, we've included them, but then we could have put in conditions that jumps over them if they're not needed, for example. So looking at one of the new spaces in the admin panel, we have the possibility to add our own fields, which we have in some of these examples that I showed. So if we're looking at the UAT part here, all these fields are things that we've added ourselves. So UAT coordinator, we want an approval score. So, you know, submit whatever required materials or meeting spaces you need in order to perform your UAT. We add those as well through the admin channel. So by doing that, we just go for the change additional fields. So in here, we have the ability to add our own fields. And when we do, we've added a bunch of junk here, but we can just go to a blank space where we can add our new field. We can pick if we want a single line, a multi-line, or a pick list. We say that this is supposed to be UAT session ID is something they need to fill in. We want that to be applicable for all templates. And we want it for the UAT stage alone. That's where we need to ask this information. And then we just save this. And that will be reflected in all of our changes that are hit by that template and that stage. Noted is this, if it's part of the submission stage, you will have to put it in the change template, because the change template itself is for that first submitting the initial information that is going into the change itself before the workflow kind of takes over and guides you through the stages. So that's worth that. All right. Let's see. Here we have our UAT session ID field being added. Okay. In the overview itself for changes, not that much has changed. There is a graphical overhaul, as you can see, and all of the new values have been given new columns that you can sort by. So if you want things to be, all of the fields you've added, all the things you've been doing when customizing, adding new fields, adding new stages, changing their names, all of that can be filtered in these views as well. So if you have current change views, you might want to update them or inform your technicians on how they could update them if they want to. That's worth noting as well. All right. I think that pretty much covers what I wanted to say here. Let me just see if I've missed anything in particular. No, I think that pretty much covers it. So if you have any questions, you can just input those into the questionnaire box, and I can see if I can answer them for you. It's a very nice feature. This is the first version of it, of course. There are more stuff coming to this. So this is just kind of the first part of the overhaul for the change module. There's quite likely going to be quite a few more, but this is something that I feel quite strongly for, because it's very important that people have full control of how they want their change enablement to work for the organization. So I feel like this is definitely strengthening the tool very, very well. All right. Doesn't look like we have any unanswered questions. So What you can always do is just reach out to us, either through our support channels on the website, or you can send me an email as well, or any of my colleagues, and we can have a meeting going through this in more detail, more adapted to your scenarios, or give you another rundown of it. All right. Thank you very much for attending, everyone. And we will have this recording published in the next few days, if anyone missed it. So thank you very much.